Welcome to our Standards Proficiency, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion webinar. We're with you at the HCPC for the next sort of 50 minutes, so till 10 to 2. We are really looking forward to talking about a really important topic today, equality, diversity and inclusion, but also linking that very much to the new Standards Proficiency, which were just launched literally yesterday on our website. So it seemed really logical to talk you through some of the changes that are available for you with the Standards Proficiency. If you are, I've got a few minutes while we're just talking right at the beginning. Patrick, my colleague in the background, will put up a little link to Slido, which is our polling app. The polling app will be available to ask you to do a couple of polls as we go through the session. So if you want to open that page on your website, on your website, on your computer or on your phone, that would be super useful. I can see that people are already starting to introduce themselves in chat. That's really wonderful. So thank you very much for that. And a few people I've met before, which is even better. So my name's Kim Tolly. I've probably met you before. I'm a professional liaison consultant at the Health and Care Professionals Council. And I'm joined today by Matt. Matt, would you like to say hello?
Hey everyone, my name is Matthew Clayton. I'm a policy manager in the Policy and Standards Department at the HCPC.
Thanks ever so much, Matt. And Matt and I will be doing a joint presentation because Matt was heavily involved in the standard proficiency review, consultation, and rewriting the standards. So Matt's an expert in that area. We're also joined by Fiona Campbell, and Patrick Armsby, who are in the background and will join us a little bit later as we go. Patrick's monitoring the chat, as is Fiona. We will include lots of things for you in chat, lots of links to things we talk about. But today we're going to do a slightly different thing. We're going to actually include in the chat a PDF of the slides and also a link to a Word document with all the links for the session that we're using today. And we thought that might be useful for you to have that fairly early on in the session if you actually want it. So that'll be up there as well. But chat is the best way to contact us. We're really happy. We'll be answering questions in chat as we go. So please do ask us anything you'd like to in chat. We'd love to hear from you. I know it's difficult doing these virtual sessions, but we're making the best of it as we can. So I think that's a little bit about today. So this is what we're going to cover: the new standards of proficiency, the equality and diversity inclusion, what's written in our new standards of proficiency about those. We're going to look a little bit about practicing in a non-discriminatory and inclusive manner, and we're going to look at some of the HCPC support for you that we normally do, and with some really exciting things that are happening at the HCPC that you might be interested in. Equality and diversity is a really important issue, and it's really important that we cover that. It is quite heavy, it's quite covered quite a lot in our new standards of proficiency, but also lots of you will have done equality and diversity training in jobs that you're doing. So this is just really a glimpse into the new standards of proficiency and what we're actually saying. And I'm loving the fact that people are writing in chat lots of different things. So that's really nice. So in chat, some of you have already started, so I'm really pleased that you've got the right idea. In chat, it will be really nice to hear your name, your profession, your organisation, where you come from. It's really nice as well, and your interest in the new standards of proficiency and or in equality, diversity, inclusion. You know, some of you will be working in this field, and it's quite nice to know. And as people already are, if you want to share your emails, we're very happy for that. But just do be aware that we are recording this webinar. So we are recording it and it will be on the HCPC YouTube channel after this session. So I'm going to ask you to go to Slido, if you don't mind, and go to our voting poll, because we'd really like to know who's in the room, or the virtual room as we're calling it today. It would be really nice to know which professional group you belong to. So as it says there on the side of the slide, if you join at slido.com and you type in the event code HCPC3, it's a really simple event code. I thought I'd go to a simple one this time. And we would really like to know which professions are with us today. And I have to be honest, this is a purely selfish reason, because we need to know what professions we're reaching and what professions we could do better with, because maybe we're not reaching people who it might be really useful to. So do pop that, and you can see on the slide, I'm going to just move down a little bit so you can see that actually we've got a lot of radiographers here today. So welcome. Got a lot of biomedical scientists, so welcome as well, and clinical scientists, some occupational therapists, physiotherapists. So this is fantastic. We've got a real nice mix actually, and probably, I'm sorry I'm looking up, but I'm looking up to my other screen. When you present, it's quite nice to have another screen going. It makes life a lot easier. To do things on. So you can see there, if I go down my slide, you can see that actually that's useful for us to know that we haven't got some professions with us, and we can think about how we advertise our events to you if you're not getting to our slide. But thank you very much. Quite a lot of people have voted already, so I'm probably going to go off that, if that's okay, in a second, and just leave that for a few more minutes running. This gives us a real clue into who's with us today. So thanks ever so much for doing that in the poll. That's super useful. I think yeah, as I said, it gives us some really important data. I'm going to leave it for a few more minutes because a few more people are voting. I'm going to use polling one more time in the session, but this is the first time that we actually use it, and I do really appreciate your engagement with it. That's really, really nice. So let's move on a little bit. So HCPC role and standards, as you know, our big part of our role is to write standards, and that's what we're really going to be talking about today. But also we register you and we quality assure education, and one of our strategy functions is also fitness to practice. So these are the standards that we write: the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, the standard of proficiency that we're going to talk about today, and the one that I think is really important, I'm going to also talk about later, is continuing professional development and your registration. So let's move on to the nitty gritty, and I'm going to pass on to Matt, because Matt, as I said to you earlier, was the person who led the standards of proficiency consultation, which we had lots of engagement with the profession. And I must admit, Matt, you must feel very excited to have finally launched the standard of proficiency only yesterday on our website. So Patrick will put in chat the new link to our where they are on the website, and you can have a look at them, because I think it's really good on the website, because it also gives you the changes we've made and the new standard of proficiency for each profession, doesn't it, Matt?
Sorry, refused to
That's all
unmute
right.
me. Yes, so all of them are now on the website. We've sent out some of these to the professional bodies you'll be members of, and reached out to a couple of different organizations like employers and chief allied health professions to start laying that groundwork for getting things ready. But you can see them on the website already, like Kim said, so you can go see your own standards, what the new standards will look like. And there is a table of changes, so you can see exactly what the standard used to be and what it is now and how that emphasis has changed. And what you'll probably notice from looking at that is that for a lot of the standards, it's not so much that the content of the standard has changed as much as it's the emphasis on how we expect people to meet them now. And that's very true for our EDI standards, especially. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Matt.
So like Kim was saying, we've got obviously our 15 professions. We've got 15 sets of standards. But for the most part, these are generic standards which cut across every different profession. So regardless of whether you're a paramedic or a physiotherapist, you're going to share a lot of these standards because they relate to basic things around core competencies that any of our registrants should have. So it's just important to remember the standards aren't hierarchical. They aren't more important than the other, so they are ordered in no particular order. They are ordered thematically more than they are ordered in a hierarchy. Next, please. So what do our standards of proficiency do, and why did we update them? So we update our standards of proficiency or we update all of our standards on a rotating basis. So these standards were updated a few years ago. It does take a long time to update them as well. It's a long process of consulting and actually making all these changes. We received hundreds and hundreds of very specific bits of feedback from professional bodies and from other registrants. And so essentially what the standards of proficiency are, it's important to think of them more as a floor than a ceiling. So they don't set out what best practices, they are more about setting out what is the baseline for safe and effective practice. It helps the public understand what they should be able to expect. It helps registrants understand what they should be able to do when they enter the register. And it links with all of our other standards. So a bit more on why we reviewed them. Of course, it's important to be reviewing standards all the time. And what our standards are, because they are a floor rather than a ceiling, they are responding to what is happening in practice and what is happening in education. So when we've set our standards, it's because we're confident that everyone who is completing an accredited course in the UK will be able to meet them at the point that they graduate. So there have been all sorts of changes in the last few years. There are changes in how we expect people how we as service users ourselves expect to be treated and to be worked with from our health and care professionals. Practice has changed, legislation has changed. If you think about paramedics, just to give one example, the way that the paramedic profession has changed over the last 15 years or so is incredible. It's just a huge amount of change. The way that everyone's roles are changing, becoming even more specialized. And that's one of the things that our standards respond to. Also is the impact of technology. Everyone uses technology in their role, and you would have seen that accelerate during the pandemic. And so it's important for us to not tell you what technology you need to be able to use, but talk about the importance of being able to use all the technology that's relevant for your role. So you'll be able to see all of the changes to the standards of proficiency when you go and download them. But the 6 important changes that you should be looking out for in terms of the generic standards are listed here on this slide. So it's our EDI that we're going to discuss more now. Service user involvement, so just the way that we expect you to interact with service users, to involve them in their care, to get consent from them. Fitness to practice and mental health, that's about a new approach that we're taking as an organization to make registrants aware of the importance of maintaining their mental health as a holistic exercise as part of their physical health, and also just explaining how we expect registrants to adapt their practice if there is something that's bothering them about their mental health in the same way they would do with their physical health. Technology and digital skills, which I touched on a bit back there, and then also leadership. So there isn't a specific standard related to leadership. There are a couple of different standards that touch on it. But overall, it's about our expectation that all of our registrants are autonomous, skilled professionals who can demonstrate leadership in many different ways. So leadership isn't just about management and taking those decisions. It's about showing leadership and independence in a range of different settings. And now the fun bit, timescales. So you can go and download these now. These standards aren't something that you need to meet straight away. They're going to come into effect on the 1st of September 2023. So that's the point at which everyone on the register needs to be able to meet all of the standards of proficiency relevant to their scope of practice. All of our programs which deliver against our new SOPs, all of our approved programs in the UK, will have to start meeting the SOPs for students who begin their program on the 1st of September 23. But regardless of when you finish, you will be needing to meet the standards as you enter the register, but also just for anyone who's thinking about so anyone who knows learners or anything like that, when you're on an approved course, this isn't going to change your ability to gain access to the register. So I just want to let everyone obviously be put at ease about the fact that we're not going to leave learners in a lurch. Everyone who's currently on an approved program is going to be fine for registration.
And I think, Matt, what we'd like to do is offer out to the group if there's any questions about this timescales and things like that. So we put a thing at the bottom which says what if. So what if I was, and Matt and I have talked quite a lot about the what if scenarios, and he's really expert on the what if scenarios. But I was particularly wondering, Matt, and we're going to come on to this later, aren't we? Really. So if a profession comes into renewal, say after September 2023, which professions will come into renewal then, and the registrant is going to be worried about being picked for an audit, for example. That's what most registrants terribly worry about after their renewal. Then they will be expected to have used the new standards of proficiency in their collection of the CPD, and we're actually going to be covering that in a bit as we go along, aren't we? I'm right in saying that, Matt, aren't I?
Yes. So if you're selected for an audit, it's going to be looking at the standards that you should have met when you do that. It's the same obviously very, very few people ever have an FTP concern raised against them, and very even fewer than that ever have an FTP concern that goes on. But if you're ever concerned about that's how we would use our FTP standards based on the previous standards. And so with CPD, one of the things you should be thinking about is something that Kim is going to touch on later, a sort of a gap analysis.
I'd agree, Matt. So what we're going to ask you to do later is think about your knowledge, for example, of ED&I now, and you would obviously be including that in your continuing professional development and any reflections you've been doing. But think about that in relation to the new standards of proficiency. So Matt already talked about the things that are changing in the new standards of proficiency, and ED&I is one of those. So think about how when we at the end of this webinar, think about, well, I'm reflecting on the webinar. What do I need to do a little bit more about? What do I need to learn a little bit more about ED&I? And we're going to be talking about that in a bit, but it's doing what we're going to call a sort of gap analysis, almost thinking, I think the great thing about the website, Matt, is it shows the changes that have been made. And for me, if I was, I'm a nurse, as you know, so if I was a registrant, a paramedic or a biomedical scientist, I'd be downloading that changes part and I'd be highlighting the things that are changed in the document, because those are the things I'd be thinking, so have I got enough information on those things? Have I done enough continuing professional development? Do I use those in my work every day? Also, are there things that I need to think about in my practice? So, for example, are there things that I need to think about? Gosh, actually, the Healthcare and Professionals Council have updated their standards of proficiency. They've included a lot more about equality, diversity, and inclusion. So thinking about my practice, thinking about my everyday practice, are there improvements that I can make in my everyday practice based on some of the things that the standards of proficiency are actually going to say? So I think it's not just about your CPD, it's not just about audit, it's not just about fitness to practice, it's about your practice and how it influences your practice in your day-to-day care. And I think what the HCPC is saying that we've listened to the profession, we've listened to what you wanted in your new standards of proficiency. We've heard that we needed to strengthen our ED&I component. And because of that, we've also heard that you want to actually strengthen your ED&I focus in practice. And these are some of the areas that you wanted to strengthen it on. And we're going to cover some of those as we go through. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that, Matt? We've got a question from Isaac, which is saying, if you're already on the register, would you need to meet these new standards to renew your registration? Matt, I'll let you answer that one.
So in order to meet your registration, our registration requirement is that you need to have been practicing your profession for the last 2 years. So you should be able to meet the standards as they're relevant to your scope of practice. And that can change. Obviously, your scope of practice changes. So the way that we've structured the standards of proficiency is obviously, like I've said before, they're a flaw. So we're not terribly worried about most registrants being able to meet the standards. But in order to renew, you need to have been able to draw on your skills and profession. In order to practice, you're going to have to meet all of the standards that are relevant to your practice, if that helps.
Yeah. So essentially, yes, you need to meet the new standards, don't you, Matt, to renew your registration? And that's what we're sort of saying to you now, is that think about it now, because next year, when into September 2023, when they actually come into force, you need to be thinking about how are there, like we said, are there any gaps in my knowledge, gaps in my skills, gaps in the area that the areas that the HCPC have made changes in, which is why those changes documents are so useful. We're not saying you've got to do a huge piece of work, but we're saying is how can I incorporate this within my current continuing professional development, and how can I think about maybe I need to, it almost heightens your awareness of some of these things. And that's what we're doing today, is we're sort of saying ED&I is, we all know it's important. We've all been on e-learning training. We've all been on in-person events. We all use the concepts, the principles during our everyday work. But it's really interesting that the regulator has chosen, not chosen, but has listened to what the profession wanted and listened to what things Matt's been talking about, and has sought to make these changes in its standards of proficiency. So thinking about those in your everyday work is really important. So let's go through some more work and we'll listen to questions as we go. We will, Hannah, thank you, put the new standards in chat. I know that Patrick's already popped them in once, but I know what it's like when you're listening to webinars. The chat moves so quickly, doesn't it? It becomes really hard to go up and find them. So we'll pop them in again. All right. So I hope that's really useful. In the new standards proficiency documents, Matt, somebody said some paragraphs are highlighted in blue and some are not. Gosh, Matt, do you know anything about that? The blue highlights. If you don't, it's fine. We can find out later.
No,
But I
that's
just wondered if
perfect.
there was a reason.
So for the most cases, unless we're talking about the radiographers who I'll chat about separately, but for the most case, if you're looking at the standards and it's highlighted, it is a different color, it's not white, that means it is one of the generic standards. So
Of
it's just our
course.
way of marking the generic standards. If you're looking at the radiographers, we also have a different color scheme for the standards that are specific only to therapeutic or only to diagnostic radiographers. But yeah, the short answer is that means that it's one of our generic standards.
Gosh, I never knew that, Matt. Thank you very much. Thank goodness you're on the call. And you're right. If they are hidden to you, as Patrick says, they're not so clear. We'll make that clear here. And we do want people to be able to see them, and we are publicising them now. So that's fantastic. Thank you. And Lucy's saying that makes sense. So your responsibilities as registrants, we've already started to talk a little bit about those, but what do you need to do now and in the coming months, year, to think about embedding these standards of proficiency in your everyday practice? The first thing is to read them, to actually internalize them and read them. It's something that as a registrant, we sometimes don't do as much as we should do. Certainly I'm bound by the NMC Code of Conduct, and I need to be reminded. I need to read them every so often. I need to remind myself of them. So this is a perfect opportunity. Launch events are a perfect opportunity to get them out, download them, and reread them, and start to think about using them in every situation that you work in. Today, I hope we'll highlight to you a little bit more, and we'll get that ED&I agenda right to the top of your brain to be thinking about. Look at the changes, highlight the change. I'm a very printer out person. I actually have to sometimes actually highlight the changes, but you can highlight them on your computer and be thinking about the changes that have been made and how important they are. Matt's analysed all the consultation. We had thousands of people responding to our consultation. So these are changes that have been driven both by the profession, regulators, service users, by many people who've been involved, educationalists who've been involved. I think discuss them at your team meetings. For some of you, biomedical scientists, for example, you have a probably weekly team meeting. Well, to say that you've been to an HCPC webinar and did everybody know that the standards of proficiency have just been updated? Show people where they are on our website, talk about some of the changes, make a presentation. If you want us to come along and do a presentation, if you want to use some of the slides in our presentation for your team meeting, email me. I can send those to you. It's not a problem at all. We want them to be used. We want them to be disseminated. So think about how you're going to use them in your own individual team meetings. If you're a manager, that would be great. But if you're not a manager, ask your manager if the manager would like you to present some of the changes and present what you learned at the HCPC webinar. I think that's quite exciting. So think about them as a useful resource. Think about how you're going to disseminate them to your colleagues. Look out for other resources. The professional bodies have the most amazing information on their websites, and I know they will be, and they have been developing materials that can be useful for you as well. So look out for resources on your professional body website, but also more resources on our website. Our website has got the basic information on it at the moment, but I'm sure that there are plans to increase that. If anybody wants to write a blog for us on, say, ED&I and how the new standards are being incorporated at their work, if anybody wants to say, they went to this webinar, it sparked off an interest, they thought about how the new standards need to be used in their practice, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. So certainly if you want to send us blogs, case studies, we will definitely include those on our website. We want our website to be useful for you and to have some best practice and some material that will be useful for others to share as well. Come to our other webinars. We've actually got a series of another 4 or 5 webinars on those, that wheel that we put up, that Matt said about the key changes in the standards of proficiency. There are also other changes as well. For example, service user involvement. We've got a webinar on that. Information will come out about those in the next few weeks. So keep an eye on our website for events on other areas of the new standards of proficiency. And finally, I think for me, the biggest part is do a gap analysis. Be thinking about where are the gaps in your knowledge, skills, and expertise in this area? Where are the gaps in your service around this area? So do have a think about that and how that might actually work. So thinking about that is really, really important. I'm just going to pause for a second to see if there's any other questions coming on before we move on to the next section.
I
Patrick's
answered
answered.
one question that I think.
Thank you, Patrick.
So in terms of international applicants, there was a question here about how this would change. I've replied to the wrong message on that thread, sorry, because it keeps moving. So someone asked about international applicants. If you join the register through the international route and you are already on the register, then it'll be the same for you as any of our other registrants. You'll just need to meet the standards relevant to your practice once the standards become effective in September 2023. If you are joining the register from outside the UK and you submit your application after the 1st September 23, then you will need to include in your application evidence to show you meet the new standards or the standards as they will be in force at the time. So right now, if you made an application, you would need to provide evidence that you meet the standards of proficiency, and the same will be true for the new standards for the 1st of September 23.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Matt. I think that's really important to recognise, isn't it? Thanks ever so much for saying that. And a couple of people are asking about the slides and certificates, and Patrick is kindly putting some of those on the webinar as we're speaking. So hopefully they're going to work. But Gavin, I know somebody's mentioning that you can't access them. We will sort it out, and we will also send them out after the event as well. So hang in there. We will make sure that you get them. You can always email us at the professional liaison inbox that I know Patrick will pop. Look at that. He just did it instantly. Pop the email on. If you have any problems, please drop us an email. Okay, it's absolutely fine. And we will make sure that we sort that out for you. That's our job. So do that. Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for answering the questions in Matt in chat as well. That's really appreciated. I'm going to carry on with the next little part because what we wanted to do was think about how you might do the gap analysis in a minute. Matt, I know that we're going to drill down now into the ED&I element of the standards, and it will be really nice to look specifically at the ED&I changes and what changes have actually been made. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the gap analysis, aren't we? So we've been strengthening our ED&I commitment, haven't we? Been placing real importance, and I think we've already talked about that, to drive the sort of agenda that practice must be inclusive for all service users. And we're, like everybody, are committed to ensure that you can provide healthcare to all your service users. So there's lots of changes, Matt, and I'm going to ask you to have a little look and go through some of those changes if you don't mind.
Thanks. So a few things to note. So we've got new standards, which we'll get to in the next slide in a minute. That's our standard 5, which replaces, we had 2 previous standards which dealt with the standard 5 and 6, which we've combined into 1. But it's important to remember that the standards relevant for ED&I don't just exist in the ED&I section, they run through the standards in general. So if you look at things like in that top left-hand corner, removal of passive language for key standards, things like that just make it more clear about our understanding of how you should be meeting standards relating to ED&I in general. So this is not a real example, but it's a way that we've used language in terms of not just understanding that you need to make reasonable accommodation, but actually taking action to make reasonable accommodations, for example. Same with the one just below that about reasonable adjustments, looking at leadership. I think one thing that is very important is on the top right-hand corner, unconscious bias. So that's something we've included in our standards for the first time. We've expressly mentioned it. It's obviously a hugely important element in ED&I to make sure that people are looking into their own unconscious bias and addressing it. And in general, you can see there in the middle far right corner, it's about how we've strengthened our language on challenging barriers, how we've strengthened our language on protector characteristics. So we've included several new things like the unconscious bias, but for a lot of it, what's happened is we've changed our language to make clear that this isn't something that we just expect people to be aware of. It's something we expect people to take action on and address and ensure that the care that they're providing is suitable for people, for all their service users. And then if you hop over to the next slide.
Brilliant. Sorry, Matt.
The current slides you can see on the left there, it's 5.1 and 6. So you can see there where we've said that 6 is be able to practice in a non-discriminatory manner. That's an example of some of the passive language that we've got currently. Whereas now if you see 5.1, it's respond appropriately to the needs of all different groups, for example. The yellow text is some of the ways that we've highlighted some express things that are included in the standards that wouldn't have been included. So personal biases, which may be unconscious, for example, in 5.3. In 5.4, understand the duty to make reasonable adjustment, recognize the characteristics or consequences of barriers of inclusion, including for socially isolated groups. And so that's a more practical way that we expect registrants to be using their standards for ED&I. It's not just about a reasonable accommodation or ensuring that your practice is inclusive. It's about ensuring that you are thinking quite actively about how your different service users from different backgrounds might have different needs to some of your other service users, and making sure that you're providing services which are working for them specifically.
Thanks, Matt. That's perfect. And we thought it might be useful for you, just as a little test. But remember, it's all anonymous, so you don't need to worry about it being a test. We thought one of the things you could do for your gap analysis is start to think about some of the really fundamental things that underpin equality, diversity, and inclusion. And one of those things is what's called protected characteristics. There are actually 9 protected characteristics, and I've set up here a slide and a polling system, exactly the same as before, for you just to put in words which encompass the protected characteristics. So I'm going to ask you if you know what they are. And this, as I said, it's not to a certain extent for me. It's up to you to think about, can you list them all? I actually had to go myself before the session, because I thought I hadn't done the work. I thought I'm going to think about, could I list 9 without thinking? I got 8, and I've struggled to think about the 9th one, but we're all human, so it was quite good that I got the 8. But it's useful to think about, if you don't know anything about the 9 protected characteristics, or if you've never heard about them, you do need to when you look at equality, diversity, and inclusion, because they are really important in healthcare. And I can see that quite a lot of people are putting lots of things up, so thank you very much for that. And we've got people are mentioning race, gender, pregnancy, religion, gender reassignment. So quite a lot of people have got quite a lot of them, which is fantastic. So well done. You're doing really well. The bigger the word in these word polls, the more people that said it. And while you're just voting on that, I'm just going to go up and see if there's any questions related to the standards of proficiency. There's quite a lot of administrative sort of questions coming in chat, which I know that Patrick will reply to, and that's absolutely fine. But I can't see any other questions about the standards of proficiency coming up, Matt, which is useful. Can you see anything else, Matt, that you haven't answered or that you feel you wanted to answer while people are just voting?
While people are voting, we haven't had any more specific questions. Someone did pop into the chat, maybe they're not able to access Slido at the moment, about neurodiversity, which is also an important thing to take into account.
Brilliant. Okay, so lots of people have got lots of these. So what the reason why we did it was for you, as I said, just to be thinking about which ones you knew. So on this slide are the 9 protected characteristics. So it's just a case of you almost ticking those off in your head now and thinking, well, that's a bit of learning for me, because I'd actually forgotten some of those 9 protected characteristics, and they're really important. And maybe that shows to you that you maybe need to do a bit of extra training on ED&I, or you need to do some reading, you need to look at articles on ED&I. So it's just useful. It's just to be thinking about, really. And the next thing we thought we'd look at, just for the last little bit of the webinars, again, thinking about a gap analysis. So we've chosen one of these areas that we highlighted in yellow that has been enhanced during the new standards of proficiency. And one of these, 5.3, talks about recognizing the potential impact of your own values, beliefs, and beliefs, which may be unconscious on practice. Now, I think this is really important because it's all about unconscious bias. All right, and it's sometimes called implicit bias because it's within us. And the reason it's called unconscious is because we probably don't know about it. We all have unconscious biases, but they're formed in a variety of ways. They're formed from our perceptions of things. They're formed from our memories and our learning, which goes way, way back. And they're formed from our thoughts and beliefs. Some of them might be quite uncomfortable to us, and it's important that we acknowledge that and that we're open about it. So it's quite important for you to think about your own unconscious biases. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of a flavour of those. I thought I'd give you a couple of unconscious biases that we we might have in ourselves. And I think this is quite useful in thinking about a gap analysis. There are there's lots of material on the internet where you can actually look at all the types of unconscious bias, and you can also think about your own unconscious bias and reflect on that. So one of the unconscious biases that we have is called halos and horns. It's quite interesting. I love the halos and horns word. And a halo effect occurs when we focus on a particular feature of a person and we view everything about that person in a positive halo light, because it makes us think they're more perfect than they actually are. And I've written one there, which is Adam wouldn't do something like that. So we already think that Adam is fantastic. So we think that he definitely wouldn't do that because it doesn't fit in with our perceptions of the halo effect with Adam. Horns is actually opposite, and it means we focus on a particularly negative feature about a person and it clouds our judgment about other qualities, right? So it might be something physical or it might be something that we picked up about them. For example, if somebody uses a turn of phrase that you don't particularly like, or you feel a little bit uncomfortable about, or you generally just dislike, then it can have a big impact on you. So my dad was a classic example. He was quite poorly a few years ago, and when he went into hospital, he would call the nurses love. And you could almost see that some people didn't actually like that. They disliked that term. It was something he always did, but I can understand that some people didn't actually like it and actually took offense of it, and therefore because he said that word, then they would look at him slightly differently. So it's just interesting, halos and horns. It's quite interesting how it affects the way we perceive everything, and it's an unconscious bias unless we reflect on it and we think about it. Just like me is another one, affinity bias. Now this is quite interesting as well. It occurs when we sort of unconsciously prefer people who've got the same qualities as us or somebody we like. And it sort of occurs because our brain sees them as sort of relatable and familiar. And we all want to be around people that we sort of relate to. All right. So, for example, if you meet a paramedic who's trained in the same college or the same university as you, you would think, oh, that's fantastic. They're sort of relatable and they're likable to you because you've got that affinity bias. All right. And they're just like me. All right. So it's just quite interesting. It can skew our ability to think about that person, and it can change our perceptions of that person. So have a look at lots of different biases. I think they're useful to look up, and it's useful to do this gap analysis. It's all about this reflection, isn't it, really? So looking forward after this webinar, I think it will be really useful to you not only to read the new standards of proficiency and download them, but think about those areas that we've highlighted in yellow that maybe you need to do some more work on. I think about, what did you learn from the experience of this webinar? What did you reflect on? How will that learning improve your practice? We already talked about that. Lots of these things, it might get you to think about your practice. Do you need to make changes in relation to equality, diversity, inclusion in your practice? And did this event help you identify any learning opportunities? Now, Fiona, my colleague, and I, we talked in preparation for this webinar. We talked a lot about this, didn't we, Fiona? And I know, Fiona, you've recently been in practice as a speech and language therapist, and this has resonates quite a lot with you, doesn't it, really? Because it enabled you to start thinking about making improvements in your practice.
Yeah, hi there, everybody. Yeah, absolutely, Kim. I think this was really, really crucial. I'll post a link in the chat to some of the tools that we use in our team to really begin discovering our own kind of unconscious or implicit biases. We used a tool that's available online and got some really quite startling results. Within the safety of our own team, we were able to discuss, what those results were and what we were going to put in place to action, changes in, awareness, that awareness of our biases and how they were impacting on our service and our service delivery. So I'll pop that link in chat just now if that's helpful.
Thanks ever so much, Fiona. That's brilliant. And it's all about being curious, isn't it? So your team must have been very curious to think about unconscious bias. And I love that your team was open enough to actually analyze that.
I think that's true, Kim. I think we felt very safe with one another, and I think that's very, very important. I think when you challenge, anything to do with how we were delivering to all, protected groups, you have to feel safe to recognise that maybe your service isn't delivering, or you as a person aren't delivering as best you can be. So I think that's really, really important, is that if people don't necessarily feel safe at work, this can be a very challenging thing to target, really, and to improve.
And we need to pay attention to that, don't we? Because that's also got messages in it, hasn't it? And maybe this would be a team building exercise that you could do in practice as well. So it's all about recognizing our unconscious bias, recognizing that maybe we need to a little bit more about equality, diversity, and inclusion, being sort of curious, sharing with your team, pay attention to the way we react and we make judgments about people. We are, as healthcare professionals, one of the things we really need to be is non-judgmental, but our unconscious bias plays into the judgments that we make about people, so it sort of works against it really. But this reflection is really the key, and we've got a lot of really good materials, and this is a material that I'm going to link you up to, which is our materials on reflection. We've done webinars on reflection that were really useful, but using a reflective tool to think about your unconscious bias after this session would be super useful, and something that you could include in your continuing professional development. Okay, so that might be quite useful. Okay, so a few other resources that might be quite useful to you. I just wanted to mention that when you renew your registration, you're now asked by the Health and Care Professionals Council to complete an ED&I section on your registration renewal. I thought it was really useful for you to know why we've done this. We've done this so that we can actually look at the protected characteristics within our registrant population, and it gives us a lot more data. So I thought I'd share with you some really good news, that we've had 99,000 people submit their equality, diversity and inclusion data in our renewal process. Interestingly, dietitians and art therapists, you should be the most proud of that because you're the most engaged group. They've been providing about 84% of your 84% of the people who went into renewal actually completed their equality, diversity and inclusion data. But it's quite useful for us to be able to look at many things, and it's the start of us on a data and intelligence journey. So I think it's quite useful. So I thought that was quite useful to share that information to you. We've also done some work we looked at in 2021. We looked at some of the diversity data that we actually held at that point, and we asked a sample of you to actually complete equality and diversity inclusion data on those characteristics there. It gave us a lot of data, and we have these leaflets available on our website that you can actually look up as well. I know that Patrick will pop that link in chat, but I just thought I'd pick one. Interestingly, we have got quite a lot of radiographers on the call, so I picked your one. And I picked what we found out about radiographers, even with a small number of the profession that we actually asked to submit their equality, diversity, inclusion data. And you can see there that ethnicity was something that is something that we actually looked at. And we found that in the data that we held in 2021, that radiographers were the most ethnically diverse profession, except for biomedical scientists, interestingly. 70% of radiographers were white compared to an average 83% across all the professions. It was just quite interesting for you. We also found out that 2/3 of radiographers work in NHS hospitals or acute or secondary care, and radiographers were the least likely to have a secondary care work setting. So we already have a little bit of information, but this new equality and diversity data that we collect on renewal will give us so much more data that we'll be able to share with you, and we will be sharing that with you as we analyse that data as we go through. So I think that's really exciting for the profession. We have an equality, diversity and inclusion forum, and if you'd like to join it, we'd love to have you. It's an open access forum. We have meetings and we discuss ED&I topics within our forums, and we share with you some of the ED&I data. So some of this new data will come up first at the ED&I forum. So if you are interested in this area, we would love to have you on our ED&I forum. Do drop us an email or do drop them an email. The link's up there. Patrick will put it in chat, and we would love to hear from you. I thought I'd share with you a few things that are happening that might be quite interesting for you. Some of you might be employers. So we have a fantastic employer newsletter that's really good. And actually, the one before last was on equality, diversity and inclusion. The last one was on working in a just culture, which is really important as well, because that includes a lot of thinking about ED&I. But our one before that was on equality, diversity and inclusion. So do have a look at signing up for that employer newsletter. It's just a click away. It's just, I think it's 4 a year. So it's not an amazing amount. It won't clog up your inbox. And if you go to the page that says previous editions, you can actually have a look at the one we wrote on equality, diversity and inclusion. There's a couple of big things that have been happening at the Health and Care Professionals Council that I wanted to sort of celebrate, really. Quite exciting news that came out only last month was about new legislation that allowed other professions to complete fit notes for other professions. So nurses, occupational therapists, pharmacists and physiotherapists are now able to complete fit notes along with doctors. Now, obviously, you need to go on training of how to submit a fit note and how to complete a fit note, sorry, and the importance of it and what you're actually signing. But it's quite an exciting development at the HCPC and something I think should really be celebrated. It's a new scope of practice, isn't it? The Healthcare Professionals Council are looking for 2 lay members of council. So if you have any friends or colleagues who aren't on the Health and Care Professionals Council website, who wanted to join us and be a part of our council, fantastic. And really exciting news that UK applications and international applications have gone online. So international applications moved online a couple of months ago, very successful. And from this month, last month, sorry, middle of last month, UK applications went online to cope with the big influx that we are expecting, or we have expected already, of new registrants joining the register from UK universities. So very exciting, because it's going to make it so much easier for everybody to submit their application. So we're really, really pleased about that exciting development. So I wanted to celebrate a few things that are happening. Our student competition, if there's any students on the line or you know any students that you work with, we have a fantastic competition for you to do. It's a student competition, and it's focused on openness when things go wrong, and it's asking students to develop some learning material for other students on being open when things go wrong. So that's quite an exciting, and there are prizes, so it's even more exciting. So do tell any students you work for, or if there's any students on the call. We have got other webinars going on over the next few months. We have a break in August because we think, well, we're going to have a time when we don't do any webinars in August, but in September they all start again. And you can see there that we're going to do some employer webinars on the standards of proficiency, but we're also going to do standards of proficiency, more webinars on things like wellbeing and mental health, public health and leadership, and service user involvement. So really exciting webinars to come. Clara will pop you the link in the for the student competition in chat. We would love some of your students to be involved. We'd absolutely love it. It would be very exciting. So brilliant. So as usual, in all of our sessions, we'd like to ask you to submit a survey for us. It's super useful. We honestly do spend a lot of time analysing them and thinking, are they right for you? Are they wrong? Are we meeting what you need? So do pop that information on there. That will be really, really useful for us to get information about. And while we're waiting for you to submit that, if that's all right, I'm just going to look up and down and make sure there's no information or no questions that are coming up that we haven't actually answered. Hannah said, good to see data being collected as part of registration renewal. Was disappointed to find data on the website was patchy and voluntarily, and the percentage of occupational therapists' response was poor. Yeah, Hannah, I think we need to share with you why we're connecting it. I think that's really important. So I think it's important for us to share why it's so important, as well as ask if people can submit it. I think it's really, really useful. It allows us to share a lot of this information with you and therefore drive changes in practice, but workforce planning, that's really important. Oluwani's ask, are there any standard tools that you can use for this? I'm developing personal tools to this effect. I'm not sure, Oluwemi, if you're talking about standard tools for equality, diversity, inclusion, or reflection, because I did notice that your question came right after we were talking about reflection. So do email me and ask me. I'm very happy to answer questions. So how do we sign up for the manager's newsletter? That's no problem at all. I'll pop that in. That's no problem. We can do that. And thank you very much, everybody. It's coming up to exactly 10 to, so I'm quite keen that we don't run over with our content, but I am just going to stay on the line briefly and take any questions that might come up. But thanks everybody for joining us today at our HCPC webinar. Thank you very, very much to Matt, Fiona and Patrick in the background who've been supporting on the webinar and jointly presenting it. I think Matt should be congratulated on the fantastic standards of proficiency. And we wanted to end on a massive thank you from us for giving up an hour of your time, maybe your lunch hour, to join us today, and giving up your time to join us today, and for everything you're doing in healthcare.